Just a bit of housekeeping. You're all muted at the moment. If you do have any questions, if you could pop them either in the question box or the chat box, and from time to time I'll review and answer the questions. For those of you who are not aware of ORCID, we've been developers of add-on solutions for Sage 300 for a long while now. We have over 5,000 customers running our modules, and on average, most sites run two of our modules. All our modules are developed through the Sage 300 SDK, which means that they look and feel the same as an ORCID module, and they support the same reporting utilities, backup utilities, and upgrade utilities. We have 13 modules at the moment, and they fall into these main categories: collaboration and intelligence, where we have document management link, notes, and info explorer. For automation and productivity, we have process scheduler and report runner. For tailoring your system and supporting integrated systems, we have extender, optional tables, and data views. And for streamlining financial processes, we have EFT processing, which I'll be discussing today, inter-entity transactions and inter-entity trade. And in the operations management, we have bin tracking and return materials authorizations. Just a quick screenshot showing you our modules on the Sage 300 Classic desktop. The modules are installed like a Sage module, activated through administration services, and security as well is in the same way as Sage 300 core modules. But now on to EFT processing. So EFT processing facilitates electronic payments and direct debits to vendors and customers. It's because the system supports encryption of bank accounts. It also logs who changes which bank account details from what to what. So it makes your keeping of cash management, or the details for cash management, more secure. Also, paying electronically can reduce your costs and improve your efficiency. So EFT automatically creates the files required by the bank. At this stage, we support over 550 different formats, but any new formats needed, we include them at no extra cost. By sending the file straight from your accounts receivable receipt batch or accounts payable payment batch, you're eliminating errors, as you've got no duplicated entry. You're not doing your payments in your system and then going to the bank software and entering the EFT payments. Email remittance advices can be sent. And I should have mentioned we do customers direct debits, but we also do customer refunds. Because we've got all the audit trails on the bank account details and on the files created, your security around your cash processing is enhanced. This is the visual process flow for EFT processing. It allows, as you can see, once you've created the AR receipt batch or AR refund batch or the AP payment batch, it's at that stage that EFT, the create EFT file is used. After the file is created, you can run the audit reports or transaction reports of EFT files created, and the details and keep track of which remittance advices could be delivered. At this stage, I'm just going to go into the software and demonstrate. So here's my visual process flow. And after creating the AR receipt batch, if you're doing direct debits, or creating the AP payment batch, if you'd for vendor payments, you would go and create the EFT file. So a fairly simple process. You select which batch you want to export. So you select which batch type you're wanting to be exporting: the AP payment batch, the AR receipt batch for customer refunds, AR receipt batch for direct debits, and the AR receipt batch, the refund batch for customer refunds. In this case, I'm going to do an AP payment batch. From the bank associated with the AP payment batch, the default bank file type to be used for that particular bank is defaulted, but can be overridden if you do need a different format to be used. And we have many different formats which are user definable, which I'll come to show you later in this presentation. When you go ahead and create the EFT file, EFT keeps an audit of how many files each time a EFT file is created, all the transactions in that file, the total dollar value of that file, plus the bank account details for your customer or vendor. So if you come to re-export a file, you can, it does warn you that perhaps you made a mistake and have forgotten that you've already done it, or if you do indeed want to recreate, you'd go ahead and say yes. But if I was to choose a batch that I haven't yet done, I think, it would go ahead and create that particular file. We do have validations that if you're creating a file for a bank that's not yet set up in EFT, we also have validations that if the bank requires a 9-digit, for example, route number, and either the route number is blank or less than 9 digits, then it can give you errors before creating the batch. So you can endeavor to have, you know, to the best of your knowledge, the file is correct when you send it to the bank. But I'll just go ahead and re-export batch number 17. And once the batch, the file is created, then you can go ahead and print your remittance advices either from this button or through the report selection area and print remittance advice, print the remittance advice from the report section. But I'm just going to open up the options screen and place it beside the EFT format file to show you some of the controls you have when you're creating the EFT file. So because I have said don't allow the creating of an EFT file from a batch range, this is why I'm only able to enter a single batch at a time. And we would recommend that because it's quite a nice audit trail. The total of your dollar value of your batch matches the total dollar value in your EFT export file, which should match the report you get off the bank from the file that you import. So we would typically recommend working that way and not allowing unposted batches to be selected because that is less secure. But you can turn those on, and or you can export just 1 or 2 payments from a file. The other important control is whether or not you, when you're creating that EFT file, if there's a payment to a vendor that's not yet defined in EFT, do you want to display an error and stop exporting, or do you just want to skip the entry and carry on? So if you can organize your EFT payments such that the entire batch is for EFT only, it's a more secure way to work, because then we can say display an error and abort the export, so you can be sure that all the entries in that batch go through to the bank correctly. If you do a mixed batch, some EFT, some non-EFT, then you would say skip the vendor and continue the export. But it's less secure because you might have just forgotten to set up a vendor, as opposed to deliberately not set up a vendor because you're going to pay them by check. Those are the main features on the setup that I wanted to go through with respect to create EFT batch. When we come to printing the remittance advice, you can either select the print destination either to printer or to preview, or the print destination as defined on the vendor or customer. And you can, on the EFT vendor and EFT customer, define your own email address for the delivery of the remittance advice, or you could say use the email address on the vendor or the customer record. And you can define the template that you want to be using. So the EFT templates, you can have different text for the different types of payments that you might be making. I'll need to check this box because I've already sent emails. And when I go ahead and click the print button, for those vendors that have been set up for email, which both of mine are. It's generating the email and sending it to the vendor using the message ID that we've selected here, and using the this particular crystal report that we've selected here. You can customize these crystal reports to include additional or different details than what we have in our defaults. And also by security clearance, you can disable this browse button for some users. So you can predefine which report to use for which type of payment batch, and only allow some users to override and choose a different report batch if that's what you need to do. So if I just open up my email, I should see those two emails being sent. So we are able to substitute quite a number of variables into the email template, both on the subject as well as in the body, plus you have the attached remittance advice. Just going back to our visual process flow. Prior to creating the EFT file, what you need to do is set up your vendors and your customers. I'm just going to look at the vendors as an example. It's very similar in terms of the setup. You associate with your AP vendors, so this finder is on all your existing vendors. You associate with them the bank account details to make the payment. You can have a different bank account details per remit to if you want, and depending on your setup, you could have a different bank account details per bank type, so per account that you're paying from. Typically, we would recommend that that is not turned on unless you really need that complexity of, for a particular, if I pay from my CCB bank account, I use this bank account details for the customer or vendor, whereas if I pay from my RBC bank account, I pay to a different account. It happens rarely, but if it does, you can turn that on. Otherwise, we recommend do not select that, so you will not see the file type here, and then it doesn't matter which bank account you're paying from. These are the bank account details that will be used for this particular vendor. You can optionally select to encrypt the customers. I'm on AR, sorry, AP. You can optionally choose to encrypt the vendor's bank branch number and account number. But as you can see, it's not encrypted on the screen, and that is only because I, as logged in as an administrative user, have been given the security in admin services, have been given the security so that I can edit and view the full bank account details. If I was a user that was not able to view the full bank account details, on this screen I would see asterisks and the last 4 digits of the bank branch number and the bank account number. And these are the details that are in all the audit trails if you are using encryption. The only place you can see the full account number is here on the screen if you have the security clearance to do that. You can also have a two-level security, two levels of checking of the AP vendor and, EFT vendor and EFT customer details, because you can default when the vendor is first created what status it has. In my case, I've said when the vendor is first created, the status is active, but you could say it is entered. And then only some users have the ability, after checking these details, to make it active. So you can have the two-level security if you want on creating vendors' bank account details. And whenever any changes are made to these details, it is audited, date and time, who changed it from what to what. The fields that you see on the EFT vendor and EFT customer, and sometimes you will get additional tabs being turned on, the fields that you see are tailored to the bank that you are using. So in the EFT options, I would have set my primary bank to being the Canadian CPA 005, and in their particular case, all they need is the institution ID and the account number, and no additional fields are needed for that particular format. But had they needed, for example, if you were doing an overseas payment, and if you needed the IBAN code or the SWIFT code, then additional fields will either be turned on here or on additional tabs for the entry of format-specific information. Just going to the EFT banks now, and I can show you some of these optional fields or additional fields. For example, for the CCC Bank, they have a destination data center. So this is an additional field which is not always on all banks. And not only can you turn on additional fields, but you can include specific help or tooltips for those particular for the new fields that you're creating. So these file formats are user definable, but also if you send us the specification, we'll include any new file formats that are required as they're needed. I will show you how to, or explain how to create a user-defined format a little bit later. But just looking at the bank details for all the bank accounts from which you're going to make EFT payments, and these are your normal common services banks. You specify the bank account details that are needed for the format. You'd specify how you're going to create and number the file, and you'd specify the file format that you want to use. In terms of creating and numbering the files, we would recommend, if the bank doesn't mind what the file is called, we would recommend numbering or naming the file based on your batch number, because then you've got, one file per batch, and you can and the file name has the batch number in it. So when you import it into the bank, you've got a list of all the batches that you've imported. So quite a quick visual clue to keep track. But some banks do require a very specific file format. And you can use any of these variables in creating your file name. And you have these controls both on the AP side and the AR side, because you might have different naming conventions or different information. For example, in this case, they've got a different originator ID for the AR direct debits than they have for the AP payments. Just looking at the a file format then, if we look at the formats.ini, so in the EFT programs directory, you have the formats.ini file, and if I just search for that format that we used just now, so if I find all our file formats are contained in this formats.ini file. Each bank format is starts with the name of the bank, the file type in square brackets, and then has the instructions describing how for example, what the header looks like, what the detail row if it's doing AP, what the detail row if it's doing AR, the footer row for AP, and the footer row for AR. And you can also, in the same way as you can add new fields and document the existing fields, you can add new fields. For example, in the bank file, I showed you that it had an extra field called the destination data center, and when we clicked on the hyperlink, the blue underline of its name, it said, please contact your bank for the destination data center code. So for any of the fields, not just the extra ones, but also for the standard ones, you can change the help text, what's going to pop up to help the users either change the field label or add an extra tip. For example, our standard branch code is called the BSB number, but in this particular case, it's called the financial institution ID or transit number. And that is why on the EFT vendor screen, you didn't see BSB number, you saw financial institution as the prompt. If I wanted to make changes to this file, for some reason, either to include different help or to maybe use a different field and have a different field on the EFT vendor or customer, what you would do is copy the format or formats that you require and create a new text file and call it userformats.ini. So in the userformats.ini, we never overwrite a userformats.ini, whereas the formats.ini would be overwritten with every product update and version upgrade. So if you put your particular customizations in the userformats.ini, then you have that for later. You have your customizations preserved for you. And with the userformats.ini and indeed the formats.ini, if you put them in the EL, in this case 65A directory, so you put them in the programs directory, then those are the ones that will be used. But you can also put copies of these in your customization directory. So if, for example, you wanted to have a different user formats for company A and company B, using the customization directory as you do for the reports in Sage 300, you can put a user format in the company A's customization directory and a different user format in company B's customization directory. And the rules are with EFT processing. First, it will look for a user formats in a customization directory. If it doesn't find one, it'll look for formats in the customization directory. If it doesn't find one, it will look for user formats in the programs directory. And if it doesn't find one, it will then revert to the formats.ini, which is the standard one. And very important for those installations where you're installing the full programs on each workstation, you're not just doing a workstation setup and you're not using customization directories, so that all the programs, the formats.ini is being used out of the programs directory. Then you would need to copy this user formats .ini or an updated formats.ini from ourselves onto each workstation, as it is, it would be used from the programs directory of the workstation. So those are the main functions of EFT processing. But using, if you're doing direct debits for EFT processing, what you can do is use our create receipt batch, which allows you to create AI receipt batches applied to invoices. So the invoices that it's selected for application is based on the parameters that you have on the criteria tab. So in this particular case, using my template for direct debits, I'm going to be creating a receipt batch for bank CCB. The payment code is going to be ECB, and here we have a selection criteria. If there's an open invoice in the selection criteria, in the range that I define, and I haven't already created that customer in EFT, do you want to display an error and start again? Because you're assuming that you're always going to be having any customer that's in the selection range you would have defined already in EFT. Or you could say just skip the customer and continue, i.e. don't create the receipt, or include the customer anyway. So if you're not really using EFT to send the direct debit batch to the bank, then you might just want to include the customer anyway. But on the criteria, you can also have some specifics processing defined on the EFT customer, whether or not you create a single receipt per national account or a single receipt per customer, whether or not you want to post the receipt batch once it's created, and most importantly, if there's 3 invoices outstanding, do you want to create 1 receipt per invoice, or do you want to just net it up and have 1 receipt applied to the 3 invoices? But this is the main criteria tab, and you can select open invoices by batch number range, by due date, or invoice date, by balance. In my particular case, all the invoices that I want to create direct debits for, I have created them with a specific terms code of EFT direct debit. but I could indicate, you could find those invoices, open invoices, by any manner of means, including optional fields on the customer or optional fields on the invoice header. And in determining what the amount of the payment should be, do you want to include credit notes and pick them up and apply them to the invoice as well, prepayments if they're not yet applied, unapplied cash if it's not yet received, and do you want to include debit notes in creating that receipt? And you can also specify exclusions. So I could say, do this run, but for this particular case, ignore customer 1100 or ignore customer 1100, document 123. And once I click the Create button, it would create an AR receipt batch, applying receipts to those documents that have been selected based on your criteria. There is an audit trail kept of your parameters and exclusions at that time of running. So you have a full audit trail of what documents you would be excluding. But quite often when people are using Create Receipt Batch, they would often use due date as being the selection criteria. So do a receipt batch for all my invoices that are due this week or due on Friday. And they would create a receipt batch for that and then send it to the bank for direct debit. And quite often there's issues or problems. People forget to change terms codes or change the due dates of invoices. So we do also provide the ability to update the invoice due date. So either by customer and document number or by customer for multiple documents at a time. So if I was to select all the invoices, all the open invoices for customer 1100, I could come and change any one of these document due dates. And you can, if there is a discount date, you can change the discount date as well. If I change these on the audit trail, it will be saying date and time, user ID, changed, which field from what to what. So that is also fully audited. Just going back to my PowerPoint to see if I have forgotten to mention anything. So as we discussed, you could create an EFT file from an AP payment batch, a receipt batch, or a refund batch, and we noted the some of the controls that you can have on creating the batches, either for entire batch range, and whether you want to skip the vendor or display an error message if the EFT vendor hasn't been set up for the batch you're exporting. These are our recommended setups in this case. We can print and email the remittance advice. What I didn't highlight on the EFT vendors, so let's just go back there and show you that. When we're looking at the EFT vendor records, we can specify if we want to send the delivery method can either be the AP's delivery method, in which case it could either be email or mail, depending how you've set it up on the vendor, or you can have your EFT specific delivery method, in which case it's going to use this email address for the remittance advice. I also forgot to mention that when in sending your EFT remittance advice via email, you can either use SMTP details filled in on the EFT options screen, or you could use the default method for Sage 300, which from version 2017 and up could either be the Open Outlook client or it could be the SMTP details filled in on the company record for all the modules. So if it's filled in, if the SMTP details are filled in on the EFT options, it will use that first. Otherwise, it will look to see your preference for Sage 300 core modules and either use their SMTP details or use the Open Outlook client. And we ran through the setup of the EFT vendors. Typically, you would not enable this box, which allows you a different EFT vendors details per bank account you're paying from. And we discussed you can have two-level security by default, in my case, it's straight away becoming active. But if I had made that entered, then when I imported or created a new vendor, EFT vendor, the status would be entered, and then perhaps a second person could only switch it on to active once they'd checked those particular details. And we discussed the formats.ini file, whereby extra fields can be turned on for banks and vendors and customers. Fields can have specific help if needed to help people do the data entry for their EFT banks, vendors, and customers. And you can copy these and create a user formats.ini if you want to make any changes either to the documentation, the help, or if you want to add new fields and change what fields are included in the bank. But we also create these free of charge, so if you send us the specification, we'll include a new bank format if necessary, or just point you in the right direction as to which bank format you need for that particular bank account. We also discussed the creating of EFT receipt batches, so AR receipt batches. So if you do have a way of determining which invoices you can create a direct debit for, so let's say, for example, it's a membership style organization, and all their member record, all their monthly member fees, they can do a direct debit for, but perhaps they can't do a direct debit for any usage of the membership facilities. So then you would create all your member invoices with a particular terms code or with a particular optional field, and then you can use create receipt batch to create a AR receipt batch applied to those particular invoices. Whether or not you're then sending that on to the bank for direct debiting, but that's what you can do. And in doing this, you can also list exclusions either by customer or customer document combination, and all of that is kept track in the audit trail. And EFT also provides the ability to change an invoice due date and the document discount date. For example, here I've changed 3 invoice due dates for vendor 1520, and those are all in the audit trail as to the date and time the change was done and who did the amendment. So I think I've run through the main points of EFT processing. So do we have any questions? So the question is, the ability to change the due date for a customer invoice is huge. Does anyone use EFT just for this feature? Does the customer have to be set up as an EFT customer before you can change the due date? No. Yes, we do have clients who use EFT just for this feature. Does the customer have to be set up as an EFT customer before you can change the due date? No, it doesn't. You can change the due date for any transaction, whether or not the customer is set up in EFT processing. And when you're changing the due date, if I just go back to the screen, when you're changing the due date of the document, what EFT does is, sorry, that's the document date, it would be the due date. What EFT does is it checks if it came from OE, then it changes it both in order entry and in accounts receivable. And if it originated only in accounts receivable, then it only does the change in accounts receivable. Next question. What are the advantages of using Orca's EFT instead of those from Sage? So I'm not really an expert on Sage's EFT. The reasons that I'm told that people use it instead of Sage's EFT is it's a simpler process to follow. Because the setup and entry is more simple. We support more bank formats than the Sage's EFT does, and we email the remittance advisors, which I don't believe the Sage EFT does. I also don't think you can encrypt the bank account details, and I don't think there's any audit trails on who changes the bank account details from what to what. So I think those are the major advantages, but I'm not an expert, so apologies if I've overlooked something. Another question. I've heard of an EFT clearing bank where the lump sum goes to the regular bank account and the details go to the EFT bank. Is that true? Yes, and thank you very much for that question. I was supposed to cover that off when I was doing the EFT banks. So let me just go back to the EFT banks area and go through this particular feature. So this, for my CCC bank, because I've specified the bank type is regular, what happens is when you post the AP payment batch against the CCC bank, the individual withdrawal lines go against the bank account. So when you're coming to reconcile your EFT batch, you need to select all the items that were part, all the payments that were part of that EFT batch. Whereas normally, or some banks, on your bank statement, the EFT withdrawal is one total figure. So you can reconcile by selecting the EFT payment number and reconcile by reference. But if you want, you can set yourself up an EFT clearing bank account, or as many EFT clearing bank accounts as you want, as you need. So I would have gone into Common Services and created this EFT clearing bank account, and the physical bank account that I would have given it, the GL bank account, would just be, a 999 type bank clearing account. It should always net off to zero, so it's not really, should never have a balance if everything's working correctly. And in this case, we've said it's a clearing bank account for CCB. So now if I go ahead and do my AP payment batch against EFT Clear, then all the, let's say I pay 20 invoices, the 20 individual withdrawals will come off the EFT Clear. But when the AP payment batch is posted, it will do a deposit or a transfer from CCB to EFT Clear. So EFT Clear will be zero. And against CCB, you'll have the total EFT withdrawal amount against that bank, making your bank reconciliation for CCB easier. You still have the detailed payments sitting in your EFT Clear. So if you need to return or reverse one of those payments, you can still do that against EFT Clear, but you would need to also, the reverse doesn't automatically reverse from CCB as well. That would have to be done manually. So that is, a very useful feature when you have, when your bank reports back to you in total for the EFT withdrawal, as opposed to with each individual withdrawal. Another question, is the EFT module applicable to AP? APs of an entity already set up in Sage, or should it also work for a couple of my entities in QuickBooks? Okay. And we do have people using EFT where they import the payment batch and import the vendor's bank account details, but you do need to set up the AP vendor and you do need to have a payment batch, whether it's posted or not, to do the EFT transfer. So you could, if you wanted, have all your vendors set up in Sage, import the payment batch, but don't post it, and then do the EFT payment from an unposted batch. That would be possible. When creating an EFT batch for processing, can you select which invoices to be paid or not? So the payment of the invoices is done through AP or AR for the receipts applied to invoices. So you'd use the AP control payments to create your payment batch in the first place, and use all the selection criteria that they have, or just manually enter an AP payment batch, choose which ones you are. So EFT processing starts from the posting of that AP payment batch in the first place. Does it indicate specific error after uploading the file? No, the only validations we can do in Create EFT File is, for example, the vendor's bank account details are missing, or the bank account number is not numeric, or is not long enough, or is too long. So we can do those sorts of validations. But if it looks okay from the validations that we can do, and when you upload it into the bank, there's another error message there, then you need to use the reporting from the bank side to find out what the error message is, and then come back and fix the data accordingly and re-export the file. Where do you see the audit trails? Okay, good question. I didn't go through there at all. So in periodic processing, we have the view clear, the completed EFT batches. So this is an audit trail of all the batches that I have exported so far. So payment batches, refund batches, receipt batches, the batch number, the user who did it, the bank it was from, where the file was created, total dollar value of the export, and if you double click on any one of them, it shows you all the individual payments within it. So in this batch 17 there was 2 payments, the bank account details used at that point in time, so if it was changed subsequently, you know which ones was used. Encrypted, because I've got encryption turned on, plus all the extra fields that were included in the file or were set up for the vendor at that point in time. So that's the audit trail of all the EFT logs that you've created. This is the audit trail of the vendor, customers, bank account details changing from what to what on what date and time. So the old value to the new value done. So this one's bank name was changed by admin on that particular date and time. And you can filter on any of these. So if I wanted to find all my, let's say, all the bank account numbers that have changed, I can go Control F and filter this, now only seeing account numbers that have been changed. So you can filter any of these fields or use the filters up the top. This is the audit trail of each time the receipt batch was run. So it was which receipt selection code was used, what the parameters were used, and any exclusions that were set up. And this is the audit of the update invoice due date. So date and time, who changed what from what to what. You can also delete inactive records. And an inactive record for us is where you've got an EFT vendor, but the associated vendor has been deleted. So you can match through and delete those. Once the vendor data is populated and used once for EFT file, shall it be stored and reused for next month's EFTs? Yes, it is. So once you've set up your EFT vendors in this file here, then it's stored forever until you come and delete it, to be used as often as you want. Can you explain how the email limit per minute per session works in AP email setup in EFT options? Yeah, so just recently in Gmail and I believe Outlook 365, they changed the rules on how many emails you can send, either per session or per minute. So if you are using Gmail or Outlook 365 or any server that has these restrictions, what you can say is limit how many emails get sent per minute or per session. So if you had a batch, for example, of 100 EFT remittance advices to go, and I think Gmail is limited to something like 80 per session, you could say limited per session, and let's put in 70. So what it'll do, it'll connect to the email server, it'll send 70 emails, then it will disconnect and reconnect and send the remainder, or the next 70, the next 70, the next 70, to get around the issue of the limit. Or if you had said limit per minute, because some of them will say you can only send 10 emails per minute, then if it was limit per minute, you could say it would send 10, then it would pause to fill up the minute and then send the next 10 and the next 10. So it just helps you get around the restriction spamming restrictions that some of these email servers have. So thanks very much for attending this session. I will be putting a recording of this session, either this one or the one from later today, up on the website, and you will all be sent a link to our YouTube channel where these sessions are being posted. So thanks very much for attending, and we'll speak to you at the next one.